So a sketch can be created on any existing flat planar face, and I can sketch on and then add my extrusions and such like that. Now, what do you do when you don't necessarily have faces to snap to? Maybe what I'd like to do is I'd like to create a sketch at the top here because I'd really like to create a slot into that curved face. Well, the problem is it's a curved face. I don't really have anything to snap to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my work plane. A work plane is a construction feature. It doesn't add mass, doesn't add volume, doesn't change the model in any aspect. It's a construction style tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the work plane here, and there's kind of two methods of doing this. There's our general work plane feature, which you can create any of the styles of work planes based on the inputs you select, or if you want to be more specific, you can actually use the drop down, and Inventor will kind of guide you through the process. So if you're doing parallel to plane through point, the first selection can only be a plane, and then your second selection can only be a point. Whereas if you use the general one, it's kind of it's a free-for-all where you can kind of pick and choose how you want that to be defined. So in the first case here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do tangent to surface parallel to plane, because what I want is I want a tangent work plane right at the top of this face, and I want it parallel to this face. So what's done there now is it's now gone through and created that work plane for me. Now a couple things about these work planes. One is that work plane is not really limited to that size. This work plane is actually infinitely in size. It goes on forever and ever and ever. It's just graphically, it just creates this box, this plane so we can see it, but yet it doesn't necessarily like take up the whole entire screen. Now if you want it to be a little bit larger, notice I can actually grab the corner and I can actually take this and I can actually change its position and its size. Now remember, I'm just changing the graphical representation of the plane. I'm not actually changing how big that plane actually is. Another couple options here is notice it's called work plane 1. Well, I could actually come in here and rename this. And now notice the name has updated both on the plane itself and in the browser. I can also come in here and I can actually turn this off or on. So I can actually right click, kind of turn it on as I need it, turn it off when I don't need it. I can right click on it, I can actually flip the normal because there's actually a positive and a negative to this, so I can actually flip it back and forth. And I can also tell it to auto resize. So instead of me having to worry about changing it, I can have it resize. So notice that if I come in here and I change this model, let's change this to, let's say 150 instead of the 100, and I click finish, notice how that work plane is also automatically stretching with it. If I didn't have that option on, that work plane would have stayed as it was sized. Okay, so now I've got that work plane defined. I'm going to create my new sketch. And notice I got to pick the boundaries of the work plane. I can't pick inside, it's got to be on the boundaries of the work plane. I've created that new feature. Let's add that extrusion, or sorry, that sketch. And now what I can do is I can use my extrusion to remove that material from there and create that cut into my model. So that hopefully should show you kind of where we want to use these work planes. Now, you don't necessarily need to use work planes all the time. It kind of adds a level of complexity to your models where it may not be required. There's some advantages to it, especially in cases where you have no faces to select from, or some instances where you're maybe doing some conceptual modeling and don't know exactly how things are going to fall into place. Well, instead of building kind of, this extrusion is based on this extrusion based on this extrusion, you can kind of have a common work plane and create all the features from there and then kind of remove some of those dependencies on those features. Now, if I come in here and I try to delete this work plane now, what it's going to have to do is going to have to delete this feature as well, because remember I used the work plane to create the sketch to create the extrusion. So in this case, if I delete that work plane, it's also going to have to delete that extrusion because the two are tied together. Okay, well, what other kind of work planes can I create? Well, I can come into here and I can actually create tangent through edge, because I want tangent through that edge, right? As this changes, this work plane will update. And remember, I could do the same thing with the general work plane command. It's just a matter of making sure I pick the same inputs. I can use the biplane option if I want to snap something right to the middle. So I can say I need a work plane that goes between that plane and that plane, and it will always be in the middle. So even if I come in here and I change this extrusion, let's make this 100 instead, notice that that work plane is still in the middle. Another option for doing that is you can actually trace along an edge and you can find the point and you can actually snap it to that point, in a sense, perpendicular and normal to the edge. I can create a work plane from edge to edge. And again, it's parametric, so as my model changes, that work plane will automatically adjust with it. I can create a work plane at an offset. So what I can do is I can click and drag and actually create that as an offset. So I want that to be 40 millimeters away from that edge. So again, that was just a click and a drag to create that offset work plane. Now, a little bonus tip here is that the sketch command can actually be used to create an offset work plane as well. So maybe what I'd like to do is I'd like to create a sketch but offset from this one. So I'm going to click the sketch command, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag off that work plane. So notice I'm able to offset the work plane and create the sketch all in one instance. So just a little shortcut there on creating that. Okay, so let's delete these work planes. And another common one to use is the angle option. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the work plane option. Here's the edge, and here's the face I want to measure that angle from. And what I want this to be is I want this to be 45 degrees, but I actually want that to be negative 45 degrees. Now, a lot of times you might have to create a work plane to create a work plane. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch, and I'm actually going to offset that 10 millimeters. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a circle to locate the start of my extrusion. So I'm going to do two extrusion to that particular face. And now what we're going to see is that these work planes are actually kind of linked, right? Because I need this one to create that one. So I'll just double click on it. Let's change this angle to negative 30 degrees instead. And notice that the work plane changed, the offset work plane changed, which in turn updated that extrusion. So we can really build this up to get the features that we want. Now, I'm going to go over here to a different part here, and in this case here, what I'd like to do is drill a hole through the side. But the problem is I have no real reference faces to work from. I can pick tangent really easily, but I have nothing to relate that to. And what we can use is we can actually use our origin planes. So every part has a built-in 0, 0, 0 point, right, our center point. It has X, Y, and Z axes going through those points, and it has planes based on those axes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a plane that is tangent to that top face. And notice I pick kind of towards the top half of the model. And what I want it to be is I want it to be parallel to this face. So notice how it actually snapped that in there, tangent parallel to that face. What I might also do is I might actually come in here and say, okay, I'm going to use this Z axis. And I'm going to use this plane here to rotate this work plane 45 degrees. Now that I've got that work plane at 45 degrees, now what I can do is go tangent parallel, and now I've got that plane at 45 degrees. So again, you might have to build these compound work features to get exactly what you want. I need a hole at the top, I need a hole at 45 degrees. Well, I'm going to have to create this secondary work plane to create the tangent work plane to actually create my hole the way I want. So those are work planes. I didn't touch on necessarily every single one, but hopefully you see enough here to understand what they're used for, how they're used, where you might use them,